Sunday, May 23rd, 1999 is perhaps the most tragic day in wrestling history. During a live broadcast of the pay-per-view Over the Edge, wrestler Owen Hart tragically fell to his death while making an entrance for his match against the Godfather. The harness that was lowering him to the ring lost grip on him, and he plunged over 70 feet to his death live on pay-per-view. The cameras panned to the crowd as EMTs worked on Owen, leaving everyone watching at home confused. The live crowd was resolved to a hushed tone, as some initially had begun cheering, thinking the accident was part of the show. I mean, it is pro wrestling after all. Eventually, people in the audience began to sense that what they were seeing was indeed real. For the pay-per-view audience, Jim Ross was the man with the inevitable task of delivering the news to the viewers at home. I'll never forget the first time I saw this footage of Jim Ross speaking into the camera with an update on Owen. The distant look in his eye and the paleness across his face was bone-chilling. Surely one would think that the show would have ended here. I mean, a member of the Wrestlers just lost their life due to a failed stunt. There was no way the WWE would even fathom continuing the show. Unfortunately, and controversially, WWF at the time, they opted to continue the show, allowing the next 5 matches to proceed as normal. A move that will be forever criticized and has soured some people to Vince McMahon forever. They will not forgive the guy no matter what for that decision. I certainly don't envy the position that Vince was in, however. This incident received mass media attention and was covered by every media outlet from ABC to CNN to national radio and so on and so forth. To the public, Owen Hart will only be known for this one incident, and that is truly heartbreaking. It is sad that Owen will never be inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. In an alternate universe, the WWE and his fans could celebrate the life and accomplishments of his career. However, I do understand why Martha, Owen's widow, will not allow WWE to profit off and glorify his name. Quite frankly, I agree with her. Owen was laid to rest on May 31st, 1999. In attendance were Vince McMahon and majority of the WWF roster. Vince McMahon was later called out for this in an interview with the host, referring to this move as a publicity stunt, and to his defense, Martha did indeed want him at the funeral. I've been fascinated by Owen Hart's death and the events surrounding it for many years, to be honest. I've watched countless shoot interviews, read several articles, and listened to tons of podcasts about this topic over the years. Now that I have a platform of my own, I would like to share my thoughts on the incident. The most heartbreaking aspect about Owen's death is that it was 100% preventable. Had the harness been checked by the rigging company, this accident would not have happened. I'm not aiming to imply that wrestling was changed forever by Owen Hart's passing. In the immediate future after the tragedy, WWE's public image took a hit. Rightfully so. Fortunately for WWE, Owen's family did not engage in a super public, intense lawsuit. It is odd that Bret Hart did not get involved in a public manner the way fans thought he would. In the aftermath of Owen's death, Bret did an odd interview on The Last Word with Jim Rome on November 3rd, 2000. The candid interview featured hard-hitting questions that Bret consented to. Nevertheless, they were still hard. Bret was asked, quote, "Where did you find out about the tragedy?" Bret was so open in such a public space about his brother's passing. To see him duck the lawsuit and keep a low-key profile during the aftermath was shocking. Bret presumably wanted to do this part to preserve his own and his family's legacy by going into the WWE Hall of Fame and making a return to the WWE. He said, "I don't want to be remembered as the brother of the wrestler that got killed in the ring." That's a direct quote from Bret Hart. What was done, and Bret could not bring his brother back no matter how badly he wanted to. Bret sadly suffered a stroke in 2002 that derailed any rumored return to WWE for Bret. It had been rumored that Bret would come back to face Kurt Angle in an all-time dream match. Of course, that did not happen, but Bret did make his return in 2010, having an on-air feud with Mr. McMahon and publicly burying the hatchet with Shawn Michaels. This is a move that Martha is not pleased with to this day, but at the end of the day, Bret did have to do what was right for himself. WWE did, of course, have to pay Owen's family millions of dollars in a settlement, as documented in Dark Side of the Ring. Martha stated that the rest of the Hart family was not there for her. That is just sad. Martha Hart has allowed Owen to be remembered in the wrestling world outside of WWE. Owen has been inducted into different Hall of Fame organizations. He was honored by New Japan recently and has had several t-shirts released on Pro Wrestling Tees. The biggest question regarding this situation is, should the show have gone on? In my mind, I think the show should have been canceled. In sports, when an athlete dies before a game, or God forbid during a game, the next game or two are postponed by their team. I understand both sides of the coin. On one side, millions of people have paid money to watch this pay-per-view and expecting a show. On the other side, there is a crime scene at hand when there is a dead body in a wrestling ring. Owen's blood was literally on the mat. I think the second side outweighs the first. As important as giving the paying customers in the arena and at home a good show is, I think everyone watching at home would have been more than understanding if the show was canceled after Jim Ross announced Owen's death live on pay-per-view, or even after he announced that Owen was in critical condition, an hour before he announced his death. The way I see it, WWE should have made an announcement to the live crowd along with JR announcement, and a police investigation should have begun. It is mind-boggling to me that the police did not interfere. A man died on WWE television and was just escorted from the ring into an ambulance, and the show went on. To be fair to Vince McMahon, he was in an unenviable position tasked with the impossible decision of what to do when one of his performers passed away. I could not even begin to imagine what was flowing through his mind, having to put aside the heavy emotions and make a business decision. Jim Ross was put in an awful position having to announce Owen's death to the audience watching at home. As he described it, Kevin Dunn gave him the news and immediately started a countdown to return the show. Jim Ross said something along the lines of, "Okay, Jim, Owen's dead, and we're back in 10, 9. And that was Kevin Dunn's message to Jim Ross. Jim Ross has been commended for this, as he gave one of the most noble and brave performances ever from a broadcaster. You can see the sadness in Jim and Jerry Lawler's face as they're talking into the camera. It's chilling to watch, even to this day. It is sad to say this, but I wonder if it had been a bigger star that passed away in the ring. Had it been, say, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the biggest star in wrestling and one of the most famous athletes on the planet at the time, would WWE have continued the show? Would have been a bigger story? Would WWE have not been able to bury the issue forever and never speak of it? I don't want to say definitely yes or no, because it is impossible to know for sure what would have happened in an alternate reality. I imagine that naturally, if it was a star the caliber of Austin that this happened to, the mainstream media would have covered it more aggressively. They would have called for the black ball of wrestling for television networks and arenas. I don't mean this to disparage Owen Hart. Owen Hart is a legend in his own right and rightfully is being honored for his legacy. It is just the nature of the beast that is the media to cover more high-profile celebrities a bit closer. In the short term, this story was everything the media could talk about. I have found clips and interviews of countless wrestling personalities, including Vince McMahon, appearing on Off the Record to talk about the situation. Bret Hart did an interview shortly after, as did Ric Flair, Stone Cold, and so on. The media coverage of this situation just disappeared after Bret Hart did their Jim Rome show, and I can't help but wonder why that is. It must have been the lawsuit being settled out of court, or maybe the news of WCW being for sale took over the airwaves, but for whatever reason, Owen's death didn't quite get the media outrage a lot of people expected. By comparison, the media coverage that Chris Benoit's death and Linda McMahon's Senate run were considerably larger and more at the forefront of mainstream media. I thought more about how the Owen Hart tragedy changed wrestling in the long term, and after reading an article on Sports Illustrated, which was published on the 20th anniversary of his death, my eyes were open to just how Owen impacted wrestling. The Raw is Owen episode of Monday Night Raw that aired the following night after Over the Edge introduced us to a new layer of professional wrestling. We saw wrestlers giving interviews about their fallen friend. These interviews were real, they were raw, they were uncut. They were grown men speaking from the heart about one of their closest friends. Prior to this, the mainstream wrestling programs had always kept a myriad of kayfabe alive. Yes, I know the curtain call took place in 1996, 3 years prior, and that story, though, it was something only die-hard internet fans really knew about. The mainstream was unaware of the curtain call. When it comes to Raw as Owen, this was Monday Night Raw. This was a special episode of Raw with all news coverage that took place for the past 24 hours. It was on the heels of just this Owen story dominating the media, and it reflected in the ratings. Raw's Owen did a 7.2 Nielsen rating, which is the third highest viewed episode of Raw of all time to this day, 23 years later. With so many eyeballs on the television in prime time, fans were introduced to a side of pro wrestling that is, I guess, really commonplace now in current day time. Before CM Punk was cutting shoot promos, and before the I Deserve Better promo gave fans a peek behind the curtain, there was Mick Foley crying, talking about how Owen Hart was his son's favorite wrestler. Owen Hart's death brought realism to a WWF product that had been heavily filtered with cartoonish characters and crash TV segments since the golden age in the mid-1980s. Perhaps, if anything, the very real tribute to one of the finest wrestlers of all time showed the office that wrestlers being human beings could be the biggest draw of all. The wrestlers loved Owen so much. I implore you, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch Mick Foley's tribute to him from that episode of Raw. No one, not even Stone Cold Steve Austin, who had some tension with Owen due to a botched pile driver that left Austin injured and shortened his career, not even he could say a bad word about Owen. The Owen Hart tribute is one of, if not the most important episodes of Raw. Let's analyze just exactly what went wrong with the rig that was supposed to lower Owen Hart to the ring, that caused him to fatefully plunge to the ring. The WWF had hired a contractor named Bobby Talbert to conduct the stunt with Owen. Bobby Talbert was the guy responsible for doing stunt work for WCW. He did Sting stunts, which were like the one Owen was attempting to pull off at Over the Edge. WWE had originally contacted Joe Branham to do the job, but he was asking for, quote, too much money, and WWE decided to hire Talbert instead. Branham had stated to a detective that he would have not orchestrated the stunt the way Talbert did. When Branham did it for 6 months prior on an episode of Heat, everything went fine. The clip to hold Owen at Over the Edge was designed to hold cargo from a boat in quick release that triggered after 10 pounds was loaded on it. And this is what was used to hold a 200-pound athlete? According to Martha, the rationale behind using this clip was so that Owen could release himself quicker and get right to the match, as the prior harness took him about a minute to undo himself from it. I get it. It may have been, clumsy TV to see Owen Hart struggling to get this clip off of his shoulders. I understand that, but this is a life at stake. Jim Ross has stated that Owen told him the day of the event that he was afraid of heights and expressed apprehension to do the stunt. The more curious people have wondered why Owen was able to decline doing love angles with Deborah, but couldn't push back on doing the stunt. Because we've all heard the rumors that Owen Hart was like, okay, basically you're going to do this, or we're just going to not use you. You're not going to be on TV. And he wanted to do this in order to keep his spot. But then he could decline doing work with Deborah? It's weird. I don't know. Other people who were close to Owen at the time, such as Vince Russo, have stated that they sensed no uneasiness from Owen and never heard anything from him in the time leading up to the stunt. WWE not wanting to spend the money on a proper rigging company is just pathetic, if you ask me, if it's indeed true. Owen was portraying his blue blazer gimmick, which he had used in the cartoonish era of the late 80s and early 90s. The gimmick had no place in the Attitude Era and beyond. Credit is returned to Vince Russo. Roddy Piper infamously publicly blamed Russo for Owen Hart's death, which is unfair, but still, this video is worth watching. If you can find the footage of Roddy Piper burying Vince Russo, I implore you to check it out. The people responsible for Owen's death are the rigging company and ultimately the WWE. Bret Hart gave some rather interesting comments about Owen's widow back in 2018, shortly after Mark Henry's Hall of Fame speech. If you haven't seen Mark Henry's Hall of Fame speech, he pleaded with Martha to induct Owen in the Hall of Fame. Here's what Bret Hart had to say about this. Quote, "Oh yeah, I think Martha, Owen's widow, is a very obtuse, square-headed person. I think she has done more to erase my brother Owen's memory than she ever did to remember him." Wow. Talk about strong words. I get uncomfortable just reading that. Martha did an interview leading up to Vice's Dark Side of the Ring episode on Owen Hart, saying that she has no relationship with Bret due to Bret befriending Vince McMahon to get his rights to his, quote, footage. It's sad to hear that Martha has seemingly been isolated from the rest of her family, with Bret included. Owen Hart would have been 56 years old this year, and undoubtedly he would have been wrestling well into the 2000s. Owen was ahead of his time as an in-ring performer, mixing technical prowess with high-flying ability and storytelling all into one package. Imagine the matches he would have had with the likes of Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, and Eddie Guerrero, to name a few. Owen's wrestling style in 1990 not only holds up in 2021, he would have fit perfectly like a glove in this current era. That is how good Owen Hart was. He was like no other. In the wrestling world, he left his mark on history, being the owner of one of the greatest feuds of all time with his brother Bret Hart that produced two of the greatest matches of all time. A match at WrestleMania 10 that opened the show, and a cage match at SummerSlam 1994. Bret and Owen just had unbelievable chemistry. I feel like Owen had the type of personality to be a great podcaster or broadcaster had he been around today. He excelled as a backstage prankster and is the most infamous, notorious prankster in wrestling history. Stories of Owen's pranks are legendary, from crank calling other wrestlers at 3 a.m. in their hotel room to untying D'Lo Brown's boots during a match live on TV. A generation of wrestlers were inspired by watching Owen. Most notably, Chris Jericho has been open about Owen being his favorite wrestler growing up. Owen is a, quote, small guy that made it in WWE and paved the way for guys like him for years and years to come. It feels like he does not get enough credit for it. Owen Hart will always be remembered by me and so many fans as a great wrestler, husband, father, and entertainer. It is truly heartbreaking that his time on Earth came to an end the way it did. I wish his wife Martha, his son Oj, and daughter Athena a happy life and many blessings to them as they own and operate the Owen Hart Foundation to help single mothers going through the struggle. I feel the perfect way to end this video is to talk about AEW honoring Owen Hart's name. I was delighted to learn of the news that AEW would be conducting an annual Owen Hart tribute tournament. And there's so much more they're doing to honor his legacy. He's going to be in video games. He's going to have more t-shirts. AEW is going to celebrate Owen Hart. This notion by Owen's widow, Martha, proves furthermore that she respects what her husband's legacy means to the wrestling community, and she wants to honor and celebrate it. Granted, there is no happy ending to the Owen Hart story. This news shows us that there will be one thing obtained, and that is peace. Owen's fans, the wrestling world, and his family could be at peace knowing that Owen's legacy will be rightfully honored in an absolute class move by AEW founder Tony Khan. I look forward to seeing what the Owen Hart tournament brings, and I cannot wait to use him as a playable character in the AEW video game. It would be a truly welcome sight to see wrestling fans wearing an Owen Hart t-shirt at AEW events. And yeah, like I said, this is an appropriate way to end the story of Owen Hart. I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching this episode of WWE Uncovered. I will talk to you on the next one.
Siempre cogiendo más mujeres porque soy latino. And I'm tougher than tough, calling your bluff, cuz